So in Dialectical Behaviour Therapy, we understand emotionally unstable personality disorder, which is also known as borderline personality disorder, using something called a biosocial model. This means we take into account the biological factors as well as the social or environmental factors that have contributed to this particular condition. In terms of the biological factors, we find that people who have emotionally unstable personality disorder were often born being just naturally a bit more sensitive than their peers or their siblings. For example, I have 2 kids. I have brought them up exactly the same way, and yet they've always just naturally been different from birth. My one son is quite sensitive. He will cry at the thought that he might have nearly got hurt, whereas my other son, he will accidentally run into a wall and just brush it off and carry on what he's doing. They've just always been very different in that sense. And that's not to say that people who are more emotionally sensitive will always develop personality disorder. It tends to be the combination of that as well as a lot of the social factors. And actually people who are more emotionally sensitive, it can be a really great quality. It can result in being more compassionate or more empathetic with people. It can lead to being more creative and that sort of thing. So being more emotionally sensitive isn't necessarily a bad thing in itself. Unfortunately, when it's combined with something that we call an invalidating environment, which is the social element of our model, it can lead to problems. So if you're very sensitive and people are invalidating in response, so they might be very dismissive, they might even punish your emotions, it means that you never really learn how to manage them. If you're always told you just shouldn't feel that way, or you've got nothing to cry about, or I'll give you something to cry about, all of those responses means that unfortunately you don't learn the coping skills that you need to identify and manage your emotions. And these invalidating experiences, it could be from parents, it could be from bullying, it could be from abuse or trauma. There's a whole range of different experiences that unfortunately can lead to being invalidating. It's not always intentional, so a lot of the time family members are doing their absolute best to help you and be supportive, but they might not know kind of how to validate your emotions, or they might be struggling with their own emotions. They might have mental health difficulties or physical health difficulties and that sort of thing. They may not have coping skills themselves that they can teach to you. So it's not necessarily something that someone's intentionally done to you, and it's not a good idea to go straight from this video to going and blaming your parents or anything like that. It's a combination of lots of factors that have probably led to your difficulties. So if someone has been more emotionally sensitive and then has unfortunately had these invalidating experiences, they can end up having what we call emotional dysregulation, which means they struggle to manage their emotions. They might find that their emotions jump all over the place, they have extreme mood swings, they might experience really intense emotions and take a long time to calm down afterwards. And unfortunately, emotional dysregulation tends to lead to 4 other difficulties in personality disorders. So the first is something that we call behavioural dysregulation, which just means difficulties managing your behaviour. So you might engage in really impulsive behaviours, you might have self-harm or suicidal behaviours, impulsive spending, substance misuse, that sort of thing. Those are all forms of behavioural dysregulation. And it's generally the case that those behaviours are your way of trying to manage your emotions. So you haven't been taught the coping skills that you need, so instead you try and manage your emotions through those behaviours. The next area of difficulty is something called self-dysregulation. So this means difficulties knowing who you are and your sense of self. It might be that you have sort of chronic feelings of emptiness, or you end up copying everyone else but not really sure what your own opinions are, which makes sense given the invalidating environment idea. If you're always told that the way that you feel is wrong, or your opinions are wrong, it's really hard to develop a sense of self. The next area of difficulty is called interpersonal dysregulation, and that means difficulties managing relationships. So you might find that you have really intense relationships, that you end up in lots of arguments, that perhaps you do quite extreme things to avoid feeling abandoned. So you might text your partner 100 times in a day for reassurance that they still love you, or you might push people away so that you avoid feeling abandoned, and that's the thing. And then the final area is something called cognitive dysregulation, which means difficulties with your thinking. So you might have very black and white thinking, you might experience paranoia or dissociation, all that sort of thing, and all of those difficulties together, all of those 5 areas, including the emotional dysregulation, are the main symptoms of emotionally unstable personality disorder. The reason why we teach people this is because we want you to understand that it's not your fault if you have this particular diagnosis. It doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong, it doesn't mean that you're a bad person, it's just a combination of a lot of different factors coming together, which has led to your difficulties, and your difficulties make sense. Whilst you're not to blame for this particular condition, it is your responsibility to try and do something about it, to try and learn alternative coping skills and to manage and that sort of thing. So I hope that summary has been helpful in terms of understanding this particular condition. The good thing is it's not a condition that you have to have for the rest of your life. You know, all of these things can be changed, and if you try and use the DBT skills, it's likely that you will learn lots of new ways of dealing with your emotions, rather than having to resort to things like self-harm or arguments with your partner and that sort of thing. So feel free to look through the other videos, and I hope that this has been helpful for you. Thank you.